Colin, what's your topic?
I want to talk about, and so I don't want to take credit for this because a lot of people have asked me to talk about this topic, and I got an email about it, but I don't want to cite one person in particular because a lot of people brought
President
this up
Obama
to me.
then.
So President Obama asked me specifically to talk about this, which is weird because he's all about it. Political correctness.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to define it for you guys first. I'm going on my phone. I'm not spelling it right. There we go. RRECTNESS.
Don't know me. I don't know how to spell.
There we go.
For shit.
So political correctness according to Google, and this is, I'm sure, taken from like Merriam-Webster or something. The avoidance, the noun, the avoidance often considered as taken to extremes of forms of expression or action that are perceived to exclude, marginalize, or insult groups of people who are socially disadvantaged or discriminated against. So this is a notion that came up really in the 90s. And it came up around things like affirmative action and stuff like that. I don't want to talk about all that old shit now, but the reason that political correctness is so interesting to me is because I actually wrote about it quite a bit when I was at IGN, and one of the common things that people talk to me at that time now, or would disparage me about, was like, this is a relic of the 90s. No one talks like, political correctness isn't even a thing. It doesn't even happen. And now clearly it's a thing, and it's run amok, and it's fucking everywhere around us. So yeah, hashtag Colin was right, but also hashtag it was obvious that this was a real thing. And I'm curious how you guys, like, what your guys' take is on this movement of political correctness, this take on scrubbing offensive things, or not being inclusive enough, or not having enough women in something, or enough men, or enough people of color, or whatever it is, different ethnicities, religions, and stuff like that. And what it means to you, and is it a valid thing? Is it not a valid thing? Because to me, it seems to be a culture war that is so obviously frightening in a way to me that almost like it almost comes off as fascism in a way. It almost comes off as lacking free expression or free speech. It almost comes off as something that is designed, no doubt, with good intent to protect people and make them feel good, but actually scrubs free will from the way people act and the way people speak and the way people talk. So I'm curious if you guys have any thoughts on this at all before I jump down the rabbit hole.
For me, it's talking about painting with a broad brush. You know what I mean? It's hard to jump into this topic and not have specific examples or something like that. Like, overall, is political correctness a bad thing? Not necessarily. Has it been taken to extremes left and right? Yeah. You know what I mean? And that's the problem. Right now, I feel like, at least the camp I'm in, is that when you bring up something, if you're using political correctness, if you're talking about being politically correct, it's a negative. Somebody's talking about it. It's the examples, maybe just because I live in the house with you and we talk about it, the examples you bring up are so far and extreme that you're like, what the fuck is going on? Why would anyone do that? When people are outraged at a comedy show that a comedian's saying this different stuff, I'm like, you paid the money to go in there to hear the jokes that are meant to make you go, you know what I mean? Like, that's what comedy is. And you hear, like, what, it was Seinfeld and who was the other comedian?
Chris Rock or something.
Chris Rock, we're talking about how they can't go to college campus anymore. They don't play it because everybody's too thin-skinned on this, that they're too upset about it. The problem that it spirals out to, that I don't know if it's just the circles you run in or the people you choose to surround you with or surround yourself with, is that it comes up so rarely, I feel, in terms of our everyday lives. You know what I mean? Which is weird when you think about it, because our everyday lives are speaking to someone through the screen and doing something on the internet and, saying whatever the fuck we want and then just having to deal with the consequences. But I feel the fact that we laid that out there, we've created a community of best friends that are like-minded on that front, that they don't get offended. They do get offended here and there, but not on the level of crying PC foul and coming at us and making all these things happen or go. But it's like when we were talking about a couple months ago, trigger warnings and all this stuff and all these different things. You were talking about college campuses, and my reaction, of course, was like, well, sure, but like these are no-name colleges doing it. I've never heard of it, And then you looked up, and there was one at Northeastern, and there was one at Mizzou. But it was like, it, again, isn't like on the grand scale. It is these, like, you were boiling them down to these one-by-one examples. And that's when it gets to the point of, like, looking, at the tree rather than the forest and where the real problem is. I feel like when it comes up and it's like, yeah, this class on American history or whatever is doing a trigger warning for this, that's like, it sounds ridiculous, and it is a bit ridiculous to me. And so, like, I don't know anybody who I'm walking around with talking to that to go back and dial back to their college career when they went to this American history class, they needed to hear this trigger warning. You know what I mean? And so it's just this weird thing of a world that's so far off and on the other spectrum. You don't even know what's happening. I don't have any context, boots on the ground in there, and so you hope it just gets blinked out or whatever.
Yeah, I think it's like, to me, I take it more as just a responsibility on myself to understand what I don't understand, and just know that the way I think something's going to make people feel is not necessarily how it's going to make them feel.
Sure.
And to just at least try to understand, what am I doing and how is that going to affect people?
Yeah.
And then learn from your mistakes.
Exactly.
And see how things affect people. And if the people, react a certain way, then I'm like, all right, I understand that perspective now, or where they're coming from. Then it's up to me to decide
exactly
what I think is acceptable or not. And like, if what they're reacting to, if they're valid or whatever. And it's like, at the end of the day, it's like, it's not up to me to decide if what they're doing or saying is valid. It's up to me on how I decide of how I'm going to react to it.
Exactly. No, that's a great point. I mean, the big thing about all of this is, and it's the broad brush painting, right? Of where I just talked about trigger warnings and how I thought they were dumb in this college. And this is from an article I read, that was about this very specific thing. So that isn't reflecting on everyone's trigger warning or anything else, right? Like, if for somebody to come to me with their story and explain why they need trigger warning on this thing, not necessarily what I'm talking about, that makes sense. It's all about, this is what we always talk about with the political argument, right? It's about being malleable, right? I want to know your experience so I can take it in, process it, and then have my own reaction to it. And maybe it is that I agree you're right, or maybe it is I agree that I stick with how I feel on this.
Yeah. And I just think it's important to just, at the end of the day, just try to be a good person. And it sounds so freaking stupid and simple, but I feel like so many people that get upset about this and like do kind of react to all of these things and that get upset at like, that wasn't politically correct, and get angry about it, they end up acting more obscene and more like upset than anything. And that is what I think causes the big problem, because instead of focusing on the issue at hand, it's making an issue out of anything. And really, you need to understand the intent of what was meant. When I say something, like, I hope that people understand what I'm trying to say, not what I'm saying, if that makes sense.
No, it does. Yeah.
And like, if you just take what I'm saying out of context or whatever, or even in context, like, and you twist it, he's like, oh, he was saying this. It's like, I wasn't saying that. Like, you should know what I was saying. And if you don't understand that, that's the miscommunication. Let's have a conversation about that. Like there's been so many things, and especially that it's our job to talk and say stuff. There's so many things that I've said that over the years I've looked back and seen people still talk about. And then I'm like,
vast library.
There's a vast library of stuff. Yeah. And they look back at this, or I look back at it and I'm like, man, like, to see where a statement I made is now being talked about years later, I'm like, that's not even what I was talking about. A couple things that come to mind are when I talked about space on the GameOverGreggy episode
with Damon,
where it's like everyone on the internet now loves to point out the fact that I said that that iPhone announcements are more important than space travel. And I'm like, I didn't say that. And even if I did say a sentence that sounded like that, I wasn't literally saying it's more important. I'm saying I care more about that because it affects me in a way that, like, this is technology I use every day.
99% of the world will probably agree with you by their actions. Maybe not in by their thought process, but
that's my entire point.
I don't see people lining up in front of NASA for the next spaceship launch.
That's my entire point, is that, like, then people just get upset at me for saying this thing.
Sure.
And it's like, what the fuck? You know what I mean? Like, and even if I was making a joke, or even if, like, whatever, they get so upset about that. The other thing being the my topic when I talked about recycling, where people like using other people's recycling or whatever. And
yeah.
People are making that sound like I was trying to say that like putting down the people that go around and
take bottles.
Pick up the my only point was, I don't understand like how that's worth it.
And we did get a couple really good responses from fans whose families have done that and why they do it.
And for sure, and that's great. But it's like people are acting like I was being insensitive to all that. And that's the type of thing was like, I don't know what to do. You know what I mean? Because I know what I meant by that. I know that I didn't mean anything bad. I know I wasn't talking shit about anybody.
Yeah.
So it's like, you guys talking shit about me saying things. You're the one talking shit now.
You're going to get shot.
Yeah. I mean, to Colin, to your original kind of point, I'm torn on this issue because I feel like it's better as a society to err on the side of being a little too politically correct than the opposite of that. And I think that the current sort of move in the progressive voice on the internet right now is probably a distinct byproduct of where this country's been at for the last 70 years, right? I mean, we have a culture where we have mistreated minorities and women pretty radically over, the last 60, 70 years. And so coming at it, I think that's what we're seeing is that, societies always try to find that balance culturally. And I think that's what we're trying to do. Now, what personally, since we talk for a living, I find it kind of interesting because I do, if you'd have caught me 10 years ago, I would say distinctly different things than I do now, largely because I'm afraid of having that echo chamber pick it up and then blow it out of proportion, but also largely because it's our responsibility as people who are, putting out thoughts in there and really analyzing things to start to not filter, but pass it through a guise of politically correctness, of saying, is that something that I should be saying right now? Or maybe don't say it like that. Maybe say it from a little bit more intelligent standpoint so that people understand your message instead of going out there. And it's very difficult because a lot of times, a lot of things that get picked up are quote unquote humor. Someone's like, well, I'm a comedian, or I'm just saying a joke and you guys shouldn't be offended at this. We're not that. We have a little bit more of a responsibility to our audience. We have to kind of be, we have to have those discussions. And, we talked about we had a topic, I think, on the phrase no homo, right?
We talked about that a few times. And so like being able to talk intelligently about that, I think, is incredibly important. But where's the line drawn, right? Where is it, and that's always the hard part. Where do you draw the line of saying, I'm going to say this intelligently versus not say it because I'm afraid of persecution, or I'm afraid that someone's going to pick it up out there and the echo chamber of people who just want to have a voice heard regardless of what they think or don't think. They just want to go out there and lambast someone. That's what you're opening yourself up to. And so I think it's definitely interesting because it does have freedom of speech does start to play into it a little bit, of saying like someone should be able to say whatever the hell they want to say, even if it's the most offensively racist thing possible. We have a society that should allow people to say that. But at the same point, now we're seeing this counterbalance to that, which is if you do that, people are going to jump down your throat and probably kick you off the internet and probably make your life a living hell. But is that right too? And that's the problem, is that it's just all extremes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We're not, whether you're saying the most horrible racist thing in the world, or you're just saying something in jest, something whatever, something you believe or whatever, like you still get that extreme reaction of the dog pile that makes it so hard to figure out. I mean, how many times have we ended this show or whatever, and you want to listen to a bit, or you'll ask us if you said this, but is that okay? I've done it before too.
Oh yeah.
Or we have to make Kevin edit something.
Poor Kevin.
Out, you know what I mean?
Poor Kevin runs out of Bic pens when I start talking. He's just like, shit, get ready. And largely because I'm just trying to be funny, but at the same time, to my earlier point, you can be funny, but sometimes I'll say something and be like, that I would meant that a certain way, but because of the way it came out of my mouth, that could be construed as very, very offensive, and that's not the intent.
Exactly.
I have an interesting, actually, perfect example of this. I went to a comedy show on Friday with my brother for his birthday, and we were sitting at a table with two women that we had not met before. They sat down, we started introducing ourselves. One of them was a mother who, this was her first night out in a while. She just had a child. And the other one was a 27-year-old girl who actually worked for one of the comedians. And they were friends because they worked at a bar together down the road. And we went and saw Brad Garrett, who was, he's the brother on Everyone Loves Raymond. Super funny, but very, 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 very skating the line of what is funny and what's incredibly racist. Similar, the one of the comedians that followed him was a Mexican American, I guess, or Latino female. And then after that was a guy who quote unquote was a redneck, and that was his words, not mine. He's like, I'm a redneck, but I married a Mexican girl. And so all of her humor was based on being a wife and being Mexican and having, and what it means to have a husband. And all of his humor was being a redneck and having a Mexican wife. And he, the things that he said were, taken out of the context of you're at a comedy club, could be construed as offensive. Now, sure. I think he was using sort of the racial line to kind of be self-deprecating, but she did not see it that way. And she got very, very offended, one of the women that was sitting with us, and started basically heckling him. And that did not end well.
Not for her, I'm sure.
Not for her. But it was interesting because I was like,
don't heckle a comedian.
On the one hand, I respect you for having your opinion. And he is saying that, to be fair, there was a line where I'm like, there's a little bit of implied racism happening here, and they're doing it on purpose because I think for whatever reason, I don't know. But Brad Garrett specifically was saying some very, very, very interesting things toward one of the African American women in the audience. And I was like, we're at a comedy club. I got to remember that I chose to be here. And I guess that at the end of the day, that's what I had to remind myself, is I was like, I chose to be at a comedy club. So therefore, I am also choosing to be offended if someone says something at a comedy club that I'm paying to see. This is this person's job, right? He's supposed to be sort of pushing the limits of what I feel is acceptable for the sake of comedy. But at the same time, am I right for, we ended up actually having to get up and leave because I didn't want to have my night disrupted by this woman who was becoming a little bit more belligerent as the day goes on. I mean, she was literally screaming and
so she became the issue.
She became an issue only because she was so offended that I wish she had done what I chose to do, which was I'm not comfortable with the situation anymore. Not because of the comedian. I thought most of the things they were saying was totally fine. I mean, again, you're going to get offended. At some point, if you sit down at a comedy show in Burbank, California, you're going to get offended. Someone's going to say something, you're like, oh shit, that was a little outside of the lines what I feel are politically correct. But you have a choice. You can ruin everyone else's night around you, or you can do what my brother and I did, was say, you know what, we're not comfortable here anymore.
But
so
why did you leave though? Did you leave because you were offended, or did you leave because she was ruining your shit because she was being super loud about her political correctness?
She was being very loud, and I mean, at one point, the guy was the gentleman's jokes were on the line, right? But he was using his relationship with his wife to illustrate the fact that he was in fact kind of a dipshit, right? So he was saying all these things about his wife being Mexican, but using that situation to illuminate the fact that he was kind of a lesser of a man or whatever. It was very self-deprecating. That's what I took from it. She did not take that. She just took that he hated his wife and was racist against Mexicans. And I know that because that's exactly what she kept saying over and over, louder and louder. Well, this guy hates his wife. And oh, look at all the white people laughing at the Mexicans. Mind you, we were in Burbank, so it was a very mixed ethnic group. I mean, there was plenty of Mexican people and black people and white people.
She just kept looking right at you guys and like, look at
kept
the
looking
white people.
Yeah, she looked at the two chubby
the
white guys. And she was like, you guys are the problem. And I'm like, oh, Jesus, this is becoming very, very, it just became not fun for us. And I wish they had, I wish that I'm like, look, if you're in a place where you're offended by this, well, the best way to show your offense is to not give this club any more money, is to cash out, get up and leave. But she didn't want to do that. And my brother, it was his birthday, and he was like, he was getting uncomfortable. I think he wasn't having a good time anymore. So I asked him if he wanted to go, and we cashed out and we took off. And, on the way there, the comedian was standing by the door that had just come off stage, and I was like, hey, you're really funny. Thank you for the comedy, and sorry that the person that was sharing the table with us was offended. He goes, what happens? Like, you go out there to put out something into, to talk in front of an audience, and at some point someone's going to have a mixed feeling about what you're saying. Is like, that's my job as a comedian. That's what I do. This is my art. And I'm like, I respect that. So we ended up leaving, but it was a very interesting set of circumstances because I had heard about that. I'd seen hecklers. I saw a heckler one time when I went and saw Andrew Dice Clay. The guy left because Andrew Dice Clay lit into him for 25 minutes straight. And I was like, this is fucked up, but I'm drunk and I'm laughing. But I'd never actually seen someone actually really offended. And, maybe rightfully so. Maybe she had some issues with her marriage, or maybe her husband mistreated her and she just didn't think it was fair that this person, delve into those issues. But it was a unique set of circumstances. And I was torn because I'm like, I can see why you would be offended, but at the same time, you're sort of choosing to be more offended than you need to be. For what reason, I don't know.
Well, this is the problem, and this is kind of where I come back to it. And this is, there's no excuse for being racist or sexist or whatever. That's not really the point, right? Mm-hmm. The point is that there's something super Orwellian about terms like trigger warning and microaggression. Mm-hmm. Like, if you told me that Orwell wrote about microaggressions, because just like he throw it up, newspeak, right? Mm-hmm. Or something like that. Like, that was what it was all, these very Orwellian or just kind of Brave New World, not an Orwell book, but Brave New World kind of just weird, kind of politically correct, very sanitized, The Giver kind of shit going on. I'd be like, oh, I totally believe that he would write about something like this. Like, trigger warnings. He must have written about this idea that before you say anything, you have to sanitize and make sure no one's feelings get hurt and stuff like that. The reason, to Greg's original point, that I got so upset about trigger warnings in college is that college is designed to teach you things, not make you feel good about yourself. I studied history. If you're walking into a history class, let's say I took many Nazi Germany classes, like 3 or 4 of them. And let's say that you walk in there, does the professor really need to tell you, like, we're going to talk about really heinous shit because we're talking about the Nazis,
right?
There's no way to sanitize maybe you do not belong here, if this is really offensive to you. If you're offended, that's totally your prerogative. My problem with it is that you project your offended posture on other people. That's when I have a fucking huge problem with it. Mm-hmm. I don't give a flying fuck if the talk about warfare is insulting to you or offends you in any way. This is a class about history. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? This is what we study. If you study history, you study politics and war. That's basically it. So this is where I get upset and I draw the line, is that there's something truly ironic, almost precious in my mind about the progressive stance. And I'm not talking about progressive gay marriage or progressive pro-choice, whatever. I'm talking about like far left progressive craziness, which is what I would deem it. Just like the far right's crazy too. Where it's like you want to scrub so much out that you are censoring people, that you are censoring people, that you really believe that a world must be lived in which you can't have a comedian tell a joke, you can't have a person at a college because he or she might offend your precious sensibilities. Like anyone gives a fuck. And I mean, that's like what it really comes down to. Why should anyone care if normal everyday things are offensive to you? They shouldn't. And to your point about, you know, the echo chamber and all that, fuck the echo chamber. I've had many fights with it before in my life, and I will have more fights with it in the future. If they want to come at me, come at me. I've come out every one of them on the winning end of that. Why? Because most people, a majority, and I would say even a vast majority of people, agree with us. And they're afraid, like you're saying, of engaging because they don't want to be tanked, but I don't care. Well, I will gladly fight the fight. Gladly.
Not only that, but I also feel like once you start fighting, I mean, I think a lot of the people's, and I do this too a lot of times, right? Is you look at something from just a headline, and you have that guttural reaction to it with zero basis and zero sort of information behind it, and you go at someone, and this is what you have to be very careful of, right? Is that when you start talking about the echo chamber or that the specific amount of voices that sort of start piling onto people, that their arguments most often time I found are very, very thin. There's not much back to it. There's no merit. So once you take them on, say, fine, let's have a discussion about this. Let's have an illuminating discussion about this. Maybe I'll learn something. Maybe you'll learn something. You'll find that most people don't have the chutzpah for that. I don't think people want to really hang in there for that. They just want to scream at someone, feel validated, feel like their existence has been heard for 1 second, and then go about their daily lives validated.
The point that I agree with you. First of all, I think it's, you know, when you scream, when there's an echo chamber to begin with, it usually means that there's not much of an intellectual backing for anything you're saying. I mean, it's just obvious. I'll debate anyone about anything I say, and I'll do it gladly. I don't care. The problem is that there's a difference between being respectful. For instance, you don't walk down the street and use a racist term. You don't walk down the street and use a homophobic term.
Yeah.
We're very accepting in on this podcast and in our company in terms of, you know, you're welcome here if you're gay, you're welcome here of any color, creed, religion, if you're transgender. I don't like, that's great. That's your prerogative. And as a small government kind of guy and a hands-off kind of guy, I think I encourage you to do that. I mean, do what you want. I don't care. And be who you want to be. It doesn't really bother me, you know, at all.
Sure.
If you want to be a transgender, you want to be into this religion, whatever. I mean, that's you, it's your life, do what you want, whatever makes you happy.
But you have to care about trophies.
But you have to care about trophies or you're not welcome here. Now, the thing that I just find sheer irony in the political correct stance in the sense that it's like, why aren't there more women in this game? Why aren't there more people of color in this movie?
Yeah,
why aren't there? And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, if you want to make that game or make that movie, make it. Do it. It doesn't mean that this movie shouldn't exist just because there's all white people in it. Or this movie, like Bridesmaids, shouldn't exist because it's all women or whatever. It's the same. It's just all these fucking really vacant arguments about scrubbing. Everything's got to be as diverse as possible. Everything's got to be diversity for diversity's sake, as they say. And it's like, that doesn't sound good to me. You know, like the example I've always used is like, if we hire, let's say we're going to hire 10 people, right? Mm-hmm. We're going to hire the 10 best people for the job. And if they're all black women, then they're going to be all black women. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to hire, there's too many black women. I need an Hispanic. I'm going to need an Asian guy. I got to have an Indian girl. And, you know, it doesn't matter that they're, they're not maybe as good as at their job as the black woman. We got to have diversity, man. Or we're going to, I'm like, get the fuck out of here. I'm going to do what's best for the company. I'm going to do what's best for the product. And I think that's what people do when they make a film or they make a game or whatever. If they have a dude bro white guy shooter, it's probably because people frankly buy more games with dude bro white guys. And if you want to make your game with an all Hispanic cast, then go for that. I am interested in that. The other side of the spectrum is when you express, and this is why the other side is really just as bad, is that like the other extreme is, a couple weeks ago, I talked about how I'm really excited about Horizon, partially because on PlayStation 4, partially because it got a female lead. And I am always intrigued by the female perspective and playing as a female character, whether it's, you know, not that I cared much for the game, but I was always fascinated by Faith and Mirror's Edge and stuff like that. Like there's something to be said about getting more diversity in there, but I'm not doing it if her, like that's the game they want to make. No one on the grill and was like, we need a woman protagonist. They just did it. And some people in the comments were like, oh, you know, get the fuck out of here with this kind of thing. I'm like, I'm just excited that's a woman character. I mean,
USJW.
Yeah, it's like it's just a lot of silliness.
It's a double-edged sword though, because you wouldn't. It's. I'd be remiss if I didn't say that some of it actually does affect positive change. right? Especially when you look at Hollywood, right? And Hollywood has been historic. It has made films for the most part that are predominantly males, and their portrayal of women for the most part has been predominantly as things that need to be saved. And that's unfortunate. But I think that in order to affect the change and a shift in that, you do sort of need that sort of polar opposite on the left, that sort of fringe out there that's saying so many things that it does make a person like me, who is basically caught up in my normal everyday life, stop and think, as a writer or as someone who's writing a screenplay, am I going to write that female character as sort of a very one-dimensional thing that's just supposed to be acquired by the guy?
Runs around in high heels away from dinosaurs.
Runs around in high heels, exactly. Or is there some merit to this argument that just because something's been that way for so long that it doesn't need to necessarily evolve? And so I think, but that's a perfect example of me looking at that from a very objective perspective and saying, you know what, I think it would better my story if my female characters were as well thought out and well motivated as my male characters. I think it can only be better. It's similar to how if you're going to write a bad guy, what's the point of writing a bad guy that's just inherently evil? It's way more fascinating to watch a bad guy that really believes that he is the protagonist of his own story, that he is the good guy in his story. We talked about Star Wars, on the previous segment, and Darth Vader is a perfect example of that, right? Where he is a guy who thought he believed he was doing well. If you look at it kind of how he was set up, and then at the end realizes that he wasn't. But that's a very fascinating thing. So, I mean, going back to the original point, I think it has affected me positively, but you do need both sides to keep it in balance, right? You need people that are like, come on, really? Like, we're really as a society going to start like weeding out words that could be quote unquote offensive. I think one of the stories that I heard, and I don't want to get this completely wrong, so I'll just cursory kind of talk about it, was there was a law school that the students were trying to protest one of the courses that was being taught about rape, because that rape was too touchy of a subject, and it was a trigger word, a microaggression. But it's absurd, right? How can you train a school of lawyers and not train them to deal with that subject? That is something that happens all the time. And so it has to be kept in balance. There has to be checks and balances, these things. And I think that's kind of what we can do, especially as people who have long form podcasts. We can talk about these things for 30 minutes. It doesn't have to be 140 characters on Twitter of someone Nick said the word rape on a podcast, let's jump down his throat. No, well, listen to the podcast. We're talking about this intelligently and trying to examine both sides.
Yeah, I think that to your point, there's always a balance. I mean, that's what politics is. It's the pendulum that swings. It's the scales. Like 40% will always vote Republican, 40% will always vote Democrat. It's the middle that's fluid. I just think that we are reaching a point where we're empowering a very small group of people that are loud and think that they hold way more sway and power with the populace than they do, to start to dictate art, to dictate music or comedy, to the point where people that are quite liberal, like Chris Rock, who's very liberal, or Jerry Seinfeld, who's very liberal, are being like, fuck this. Like, I don't. First of all, Jerry Seinfeld doesn't need to do anything, and he's coming out and being like, this is fucking crazy. And like, it's not just they're the ones that are bold enough and don't care because they have so much money and so much clout that they'll say it. They really are speaking for a lot of younger and lesser known comedians that feel like they can't say, like they can't, oh, you can't joke about this. Why not? Joke about whatever the fuck I want to joke about.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, if you're offended by it, that's your prerogative, and I respect that and I appreciate that. But I'm going to joke about it anyway.
Right.
And if you can't handle that, that's your problem. And that, I feel like, is the majority opinion. Not even the majority opinion, because I do believe in the tyranny of the majority. So I'm not necessarily saying it's just because of a majority, but a vast majority of people feel the same way.
Well,
Men,
I would assume so.
Women, every ethnicity, every religion. I'm sure a plurality of all of them feel like, just shut the fuck up. If there's 4 white guys on the movie poster, it's going to be fine. Right. If there's 2 black women in this movie, it's going to be great. If it's like, we can't. It's so funny because we look at things in binary and don't realize that it's actually destructive. As long as we keep differentiating between everyone, as long as we keep bringing and hashing these same tired tropes up all over and over again about the way things are and these trigger warnings and these microaggressions and all of this, I feel like it holds us back, and I really do find significant irony in the progressive side of this argument basically censoring everyone, because that's basically what they want.
See, I don't agree with that. I think that it is important to kind of, bring the minorities and all that stuff and kind of put more focus on it. And like, I agree with you fundamentally that it's like everyone should be treated the same. But I think that because those groups have been treated so differently for so long, we do need to kind of support, like what Nick was saying, like really do kind of redefine what all that stuff is. And we saw it over the 90s. We saw it like going into now, like the way that gays have been treated then and now. It's not perfect, but there is progress. And I think a lot of that does come down to the fact that those conversations started happening. It was way more taboo to be doing that, even like Seinfeld with like saying the whole, not that there's anything wrong with that and like all that type of stuff. That type of stuff I think really pushed forward this thing where it's gays now a little bit more of a accepted thing. And I think that, getting more women into roles, getting more ethnicities into main roles, like doing all that type of stuff and making them real characters that matter. It's important. And it's like, I agree with you fundamentally that we should all be treated equally.
I think it's back to the broad brush and the spectrum, right? The truth is somewhere in between. I don't think it needs to be ignored. I don't think it needs to be brought up on every case.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Somewhere in there's this middle area.
Yeah,
And sadly, on Twitter with 140 characters, all we get is...
Sure. And it's important to note that, and I've said it before, it goes both ways. The other side sucks too. Like,
well, I mean,
the other side that complains about the all female Ghostbusters and stuff. I'm like, I think that's really an interesting idea. So it's, but I think that it, like, to this point, like, you don't bring up. I really don't feel like fundamentally as someone who writes, like, the character is the character. You do what's necessary for the character. You don't write around what you think you need to fill a diversity quota in your story. I'm sorry,
Sure.
like that's not the way art is created. I don't know any creator that goes about like, I'm gonna write a story, it's gonna have 3 acts, and we have to have complete gender diversity. There's got to be complete ethnic diversity.
There are plenty of people in
it.
Hollywood that would do that.
It's totally absurd. It's like what are the like?
But what are they
is the
trying to say
character?
with the art, though? I mean, like if the goal with the art is trying to make some type of change and is trying to change the perception on stuff, like I
If
think
that is
stuff
the goal of the
very-
art, that is not the goal of most art. You
I
know?
mean, I don't think that's fair to say. Like
The goal of most art is
art's
to
whatever they
change
want it to
something.
be.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't think the goal of art is to say like, let's change something. I don't think that like they're writing episode 7 and being like, let's change shit. You know, like I think they're being like,
if you look at episode 7, like I definitely think that I think Star Wars has always been kind of.
yeah, I was gonna say that's a bad example for you to bring up
progressive-
because Star Wars has always, since episode 4, empowered white women.
I didn't bring up Star Wars.
Well, we were talking about, you just said looking at episode 7 and like they're definitely being. I'm saying you brought up you just said it.
Okay, sorry.
I was saying that's a bad example in a way to reinforce the idea because as to your point, they've always been progressive. The man who blew up the Death Star is black, so it's not like, and that was in 1983.
And I mean, Leia is like a very strong lead
to be fair,
female character.
Billy D. Williams transcends all the racial and gender bounds.
He does. Billy D.
god.
Williams is
He's
awesome.
a
I hope he's not in
goddess.
the new ones because now everyone needs to be in it. But that's great.
That would be.
But the point I'm trying to make is, like, let things happen that make sense for the story. And if it's a gender imbalance or a racial imbalance in some way, then that's the way it is. I do just think that we've gone to this extreme where they're complaining. It's just endless streams of bitching about everything.
Yeah, but I think
that
there's-
really for people that.
I
And
think
here's
there's
the thing
some good that can come from it. Though.
I really don't at this point because it just
I
makes
do because
people,
I feel like it's a vocal minority that's out there that's bitching on one side, a vocal minority on the other side, and then there's the rest of us who get to sit in the middle and really think about the issues. Perfect example is was it Kim Davis, that girl, the woman that got put in jail because she wouldn't
Yep.
give
out marriage
marriage
licenses to
licenses,
same-sex
right?
couples.
That is a fascinating thing, right? You've got the right who was like she shouldn't be going to jail for her beliefs. The left who's like you can't do your job. You're a state employee. You can't do your job. You should step down. And then there's the rest of us in the middle that can kind of a little bit see her side in it, right? Kind of, and for the most, no, I can because she believes in something. She is allowed to believe in that, and she was believed in it so much she went to jail for it. I can appreciate and respect that. I don't agree with her. I think that if she can't do it, I'm more on the left on that.
Yeah,
I think
you
if she can't do her job.
your job
she
was
has
to
go
do
away.
that.
But I've heard both sides of that story, and now I can form an opinion on that. That is not my first gut reaction was fire her, get her out. Right. But I can appreciate that she is not an inherently evil person. She just has a belief structure that I don't believe in. And that there is another side to that story that is worth me at least looking at and going, nope, I got all the facts. I still believe what I believe. Right. I still have an opinion, but now I've taken a look at all of it and think, you know what? I think my opinion is sound, or maybe I need to shift it a little bit. And I think that's what happens when you start getting these kind of crazies out there, is because you just have to be smart about it, and it has to boil down to the individual. Like you're saying, it can't be broad strokes. It has to boil down to you. Look at it all. Take a step back before you draft that tweet. Think about it for a second, and then put something out there. That's
And also just know that whatever you put out there, your view on that is going to be different the next day. You're going to know more information. It might not change, but it's like, it's going to be, you're going to know more information. You're going to have a different perspective on your life. And I think the important thing is to keep checking yourself and to keep thinking about where you're at and where you stand on stuff and to keep trying to find out both sides. And it's not just two sides, every side. Find out as many sides as possible.
The point I was trying to make and where I'm kind of getting to the apex of the argument for me is these reductive arguments that we're talking about, these reductive approaches to just numbers and just quotas and all this nonsense, is that the ultimate victim are the good people that don't feel a negative way but are stigmatized into looking a certain way because people don't, there's a certain group of people that will just ruin them because I've said it in the past and I'll say it again. What happened to the Mozilla CEO when he was basically pushed out of Firefox because he gave money to Proposition 8, which was an anti-gay marriage thing? I'm like, that's fucked up. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sorry. Like, I'm pro-gay marriage. I've been pro-gay marriage for a very long time. A man shouldn't be pushed out for his fucking mainstream political arguments, especially in 2008. He was pushed out of that company because of his political beliefs. And it's not like he has fascist or fucking communist political beliefs. These are not outside the mainstream, still, unfortunately. But my point is that I took a stand for that dude online and was just like, I'm pro-gay marriage, but this seems like fucked up. It's the same argument I've always made where I'm like, people are like, oh, this pro, I would never support anyone that doesn't support gay marriage. I'm like, oh, did you vote for Barack Obama in 2008? I'm just kind of look at my nails and just kind of, be like, and just wait for the answer. Like, yeah, I'm like, oh, because Barack Obama was against gay marriage when he ran in 2008. So I guess you're a bigot. And that's what it comes down to. That guy's a bigot, The guy who, says, I always go back to Borderlands 2 in the girlfriend mode, which was one of my favorite things ever in terms of illustrating how fucking silly this shit is, where a guy giving an interview for Borderlands 2 that worked at Gearbox talked about this kind of complimentary co-op mode, and he called it to one of the publishers, or one of the journalists rather, girlfriend mode, which was a way of saying like, oh, it's for people that don't play the game, company. He didn't mean it offensive. The guy's not sexist. He maybe used the wrong terminology considering women play games, but he was deemed a sexist and it probably ruined his fucking career for a little while.
Yeah.
He didn't even do anything wrong. Like, this is the kind of shit I'm talking about, or when everyone jumped all over Far Cry 4 and Pagan Min because he looked white in the art when he was holding like a grenade against like an indigenous person in the art and stuff like that. And I'm like, the fuck are you guys talking about? First of all, he's not white, he's Asian. Second of all, he's a bad guy.
Yeah.
Like,
if the bad guy didn't do bad things that were offensive,
exactly.
There'd be no game.